Humans are mammals, but unlike almost every other mammal on Earth, we walk around almost naked. No fur to keep us warm. No thick coat to protect us from wind, rain, or cold nights. Just skin showing. If you think about evolution, this makes no sense. Fur is not just decoration. It keeps you warm, protects you, helps you survive. If evolution takes something away, it's because keeping it became too expensive, because another way replaced it, because something else mattered more. Other animals kept their fur because they needed it to survive. Humans survived without it, which means losing fur was not a mistake. Somewhere in the past, the human body stopped caring most about warmth, hiding and staying safe, and began caring about something else. Lasting longer, being exposed, needing others. The moment humans lost their fur was the moment they accepted being vulnerable forever. Cold could reach the skin faster. Heat could escape the body faster. Injuries became easy to see. Weakness could no longer be hidden. Why did humans lose their fur while other animals kept theirs? And why did? From how we hunt to how we live, to why humans have never stopped looking for shelter. Humans are mammals. Yet, unlike almost every other mammal on Earth, our bodies are almost naked. This is not a small difference. Fur is one of the most important survival tools in the animal kingdom. It traps heat, protects skin, makes impact softer, reduces injury, and shields the body from the environment. In evolution terms, fur is not optional. It costs a lot to grow, costs a lot to keep, and is never lost without a powerful reason. When evolution removes something so useful, it's because keeping it has become more dangerous than losing it. Humans are mammals, yet our bodies stand apart in a way that cannot be ignored. Almost every mammal on Earth carries fur as a permanent layer of protection. Fur keeps you warm against cold, shields the skin, reduces injury, and keeps the body stable against environmental stress. In evolution terms, fur is not a luxury. It is a costly thing, and evolution does not throw away such things without extreme pressure. When fur disappears, it's because keeping it has become more dangerous than losing it. For early humans, that danger was heat. The environment that shaped the human body was more and more open, dry, and hot. As forests went away and grasslands grew bigger, shade became hard to find, and distances between resources grew larger. A body that cannot release heat well loses coordination, gets dehydrated fast, and is forced to stop. Stopping too long in open land meant exposure, being vulnerable, and death. Fur in this context became a problem. A fur-covered body traps heat near the skin. That trapped heat limits how long the body can stay active. Most mammals accept this limit. Their survival plan is built around short bursts of movement followed by rest. They run, hide, cool down, and recover under insulation. Early humans could not rely on this pattern. Food was not always close. Water was not always nearby. Survival demanded continuous low-intensity movement rather than explosive speed. To remain active under heat, the body had to change. Human body shifted toward releasing heat. Sweat glands spread across the body, letting evaporation carry heat away. Blood flow patterns changed to move heat from the core to the skin. Standing upright reduced direct sun exposure and increased airflow. But these changes only worked fully if heat could escape the surface. As long as fur remained, cooling ability was limited. The body would make heat faster than it could release it. Losing fur removed that bottleneck. A mostly hairless body allows sweat to evaporate directly. Air movement cools the skin well. Heat escapes continuously instead of building up. It makes the body work during long effort. Humans did not become faster than other animals. They became harder to stop. They could keep moving when heat forced others to slow down. This shift changed the entire way of survival. Instead of relying on speed or strength, humans relied on lasting longer. Instead of overpowering prey quickly, they could follow it patiently. Heat that hurt other animals became a weapon rather than a threat. This plan only works if the human body stays working while everything else overheats. Fur would have destroyed that advantage. Insulation would have ended movement too early. This explains why fur did not return later, even when humans moved into colder places. Any return of thick fur would trap heat again and shorten activity time. Cold could be solved through behavior. Heat could not. Humans did not lose their fur because they became careless or advanced. They lost it because survival demanded long movement in hot environments. Fur protected the body, but it also limited it. Lasting longer required exposure. And once exposure was accepted, the human path could not go back. Once the body accepted exposure as the price of lasting longer, survival stopped being something biology could handle alone. A fur-covered animal carries its protection everywhere, whether it's moving or resting. Without insulation, the body becomes really good at releasing heat, but really dependent on conditions. Movement keeps it alive. Stopping without preparation puts it at risk. Too much effort makes heat faster than it can be released. Too little effort makes exposure longer and drains water. Survival exists in between, and staying there requires constant managing. This is why the human nervous system became tightly linked to the skin. Feeling is not secondary. Heat, thirst, tired feelings, irritation, and discomfort appear early. Because delay is dangerous. These signals are not failures to handle hardship. They are tools that allow correction before collapse. Fur would have softened those signals and delayed response. Humans lost that buffer and gained immediacy instead. Immediacy helps lasting longer because it prevents catastrophic overheating. This also explains why human movement patterns are so different from other animals. Humans are not built for repeated explosive effort. What the body likes instead is steady pacing, small adjustments, and long times. Walking becomes the best way to travel because it makes manageable heat while allowing continuous cooling. This is not a cultural habit learned later. It's a direct result of a body designed to release heat rather than keep it. As a result, time itself becomes a biological thing. When to move matters as much as how far. Midday heat changes what the body can handle. Morning and evening give more capacity. A fur-covered animal experiences these differences less sharply because insulation makes internal temperature stable. A human body feels them immediately. Timing becomes survival thinking rather than convenience. Once this system is in place, it cannot handle insulation returning. Any big regrowth of fur would trap heat, quiet sensory feedback, and shorten the time the body can remain active. The advantage that allowed humans to survive in open, hot environments would disappear. This is why evolution never reversed the loss, even when humans later entered colder climates. Instead of changing the body again, humans changed behavior. Shade replaces fur during rest, fire replaces fur at night. Clothing replaces fur selectively, only when movement stops. Protection becomes external and adjustable rather than internal and permanent. The body stays optimized for heat release at all times. This decision locks humans into exposure permanently. An exposed body is powerful while moving and vulnerable while still. That trade-off only makes sense if survival depends more on lasting longer than on passive safety. For early humans, it did. Food sources were spread out. Water was not guaranteed. Danger came from collapse as much as from predators. A body that could keep going under heat had an advantage nothing else could match. This is the point where the human story truly separates from every other mammal. Losing fur was not a cosmetic change. From that moment forward, survival depended less on what the body carried and more on how it was managed. Lasting longer became the core thing. Exposure became the cost. Everything that followed awareness, pacing, planning, cooperation, and later technology exists because once fur was gone, the body could no longer be careless even for a moment. As exposure became permanent, the human body could no longer rely on instinct alone. Instinct works best when conditions are stable and forgiving, when insulation absorbs error and time cushions mistakes. An exposed body does not have that luxury. Small wrong choices add up quickly. Heat builds, water drains, tired feeling deepens. Because of this, survival began to depend on seeing ahead rather than reacting. The body learned to act before danger peaked instead of responding after it arrived. Drinking before thirst became bad, slowing before exhaustion, seeking shade before collapse. They were forced directly by body science. A body that waits too long fails. This pressure changed how humans relate to the future. The future stopped being abstract. Discomfort was no longer something to handle bravely. It was information pointing forward in time. This is why humans developed such ability to notice early warning signals, Skin temperature, dryness of the mouth, heaviness in the muscles, changes in breathing. All of these became meaningful because they predicted what would happen next if nothing changed. Fur would have delayed these signals and made the future less urgent. Humans lost that delay, adjusting for what is coming rather than what has already happened. This also explains why human survival more and more depended on being steady rather than extremes. Steady effort keeps the body within manageable limits. Over time, those who survived were not the strongest or the fastest, but the most steady. Being steady here does not mean control through force. It means matching with conditions, matching pace to temperature, matching effort to water intake, matching movement to land. This matching is the hidden thinking behind lasting longer. It's not stubbornness. It's responsiveness kept over time. Once lasting longer became central, rest itself changed meaning. Rest was no longer simply stopping. Rest had to be protected. An exposed body that stops without shelter loses heat or continues to lose water. Rest became something to prepare for, not something that happened automatically. Shade, grouping, timing, and later tools made rest possible. This need pushed human survival away from living alone. Working together became protective because it allowed rest to be shared. One person could stay alert while another recovered. Fur-covered animals can rest alone without planning. Humans could not. Exposure turned rest into a group achievement. This group part fed back into survival. Shared timing, shared pacing, and shared steadiness reduced risk for everyone. Over time, this made humans unusually paying attention to others' condition. Confusion or weakness threatened the group. Paying attention to others was not kindness in the abstract, it was risk management. An exposed body cannot ignore failure nearby because collapse spreads. This ability to notice is a direct result of fur loss. When insulation disappears, bodies become needing each other. The loss of fur also narrowed the space for error across days, not just moments. Doing too much today reduces ability tomorrow. Losing water lingers, injury gets worse. A fur-covered animal can often recover under insulation even after pushing too far. Humans cannot rely on that recovery. Choices connect forward. Lasting longer is preserved not by heroic effort, but by avoiding damage you can't fix. This is why humans learn to value pacing, recovery, and taking care long before official knowledge existed. These were not cultural likes. They were survival filters. Those who ignored them disappeared. All of this goes back to the same irreversible decision. Insulation trapped heat. Heat shortened long activity. Humans shed fur to remain active under hot conditions. That choice solved one problem and created another. It allowed movement to continue, but it removed passive protection. From that point on, survival depended on attention, timing, cooperation, and control. These traits did not make humans gentle or careful by nature. They made humans able to survive. An exposed body cannot afford too much delay or blindness to conditions. It survives by staying responsive, staying matched, and staying just inside. The limits that fur once softened but lasting longer could not afford to keep. As survival became unable to be separated from managing, the human body began to treat the environment as something that had to be read continuously rather than just endured. A fur-covered animal can afford moments of not paying attention because insulation absorbs air and delays result. An exposed body cannot. Every shift in sunlight, airflow, humidity, and ground temperature changes the balance between heat making and heat loss. The same movement that is safe in one condition becomes dangerous in another. Moving on damp ground is not the same as moving on dry soil. These differences are not just ideas. They register immediately on the skin. Losing fur removed the filter that once softened these contrasts, forcing the body to become exact instead. It means awareness early enough to adjust before damage adds up. This is why human attention evolved as a body function before it became a mental one. The nervous system watches temperature, water level, muscle strain, and breathing not because the body is anxious, but because it must continuously check whether the current state can be kept going. This checking runs quietly in the background of every action. It asks whether effort matches conditions, whether pace matches heat, whether continuing is possible without cost. Regular movement makes. Irregular effort creates spikes that overwhelm managing. Fur-covered animals tolerate being irregular because insulation smooths extremes. Humans cannot rely on that smoothing. This liking is not mental comfort. It's an exposed body reducing uncertainty. Unknown conditions increase risk because the body cannot immediately predict how effort and heat will work together. Humans therefore approach newness carefully, testing limits rather than rushing past them. This carefulness is not fear-based. It is adjustment-based. The loss of fur also changed how humans experience failure. Failure is rarely sudden. Overheating, losing water, and exhaustion develop slowly. They announce themselves through small changes long before collapse. Ignoring those changes turns strain into injury. Responding to them turns strain into adjustment. This is why lasting longer does not reward toughness alone. Toughness delays response. Being responsive keeps you working. A fur-covered animal can afford delayed response because insulation buys time. A human body cannot. This pressure shaped how humans relate to learning. Knowledge that reduces exposure has immediate value. Knowing where shade stays, when heat peaks, or how land changes effort directly makes you last longer. Knowledge here is not abstract advantage. It's stored managing. Where fur once made the body stable physically, memory makes it stable through behavior. Forgetting forces the body to relearn limits through strain, which is costly. This is why humans became dependent on shared knowledge. One person's mistake under exposure can affect others. Sharing what you notice reduces group risk. A fur-covered animal can fail alone and recover alone. Humans work closer to limits. Results spread more easily. Working together therefore becomes protective rather than optional. One person notices rising heat while another pushes too hard. One slows while another recovers. These patterns are not cultural additions layered onto biology. They are direct responses to a body that no longer carries its protection internally. As these behaviors became stable, humans lived in a narrow but powerful spot. They could stay active when heat forced others to stop, but only by staying watchful, paced, and working together. Losing fur did not make humans fragile. It made survival conditional on continuous adjustment, where staying alive depended less on force and more on knowing when to continue, when to slow, and when to change path before the body paid a price it could not recover from. And as this way of living settled into the body over generations, the exposed human form began to experience the world not as a background, but as a constant participant in survival, where heat, light, wind, distance, and effort were never neutral things but active forces shaping what could be done next. And this continuous interaction slowly rewired how humans saw safety itself, because safety was no longer something that could be carried passively on the body, but something that came only when conditions were managed correctly, which meant that the body learned to connect calm not with stillness, but with successful managing when things lined up. The nervous system relaxed not because danger disappeared, but because balance was temporarily achieved. And this connection stays deeply embedded even now, which explains why humans often feel more settled after steady movement than after complete stillness. Motion under control reassures an exposed body that managing is working, while stillness without context leaves uncertainty unresolved. And this uncertainty is not fear in the emotional sense, but a lack of proof that conditions are being handled properly. Since a body without fur cannot rely on passive buffering, it must constantly confirm that it stays within okay limits. And this need for proof shaped how humans relate to repetition and routine. Because repetition reduces unknowns and routine makes feedback loops stable, allowing the body to predict how effort will turn into heat, how heat will turn into tired feeling, and how long recovery will take. And in environments where survival depends on avoiding sudden overload, being predictable becomes valuable, not as comfort but as protection. And this liking for predictable managing explains why humans often resist sudden changes in rhythm even when change promises improvement. Because any disruption brings unknown interactions between effort and exposure that the body cannot immediately calculate. And so it responds with carefulness rather than excitement. Not because it fears newness, but because newness temporarily removes the managing map that lasting longer depends on. And as these patterns reinforce themselves over time, humans became more and more pointed toward continuity rather than intensity. because intensity makes rapid heat and rapid using up, while continuity keeps function across hours, days, and seasons, and this pointing does not reduce ambition, curiosity, but channels them through pacing and steps rather than force. Which is why human achievement so often takes the form of long building up rather than single big moments, and why progress appears gradual even when outcomes are significant. Because an exposed body cannot afford repeated collapse and must therefore spread effort across time. And this spreading shaped how humans experience success itself, because success became less about reaching an endpoint and more about staying capable afterward. A hunt was successful only if the body could still move the next day. A journey was successful only if recovery was possible afterward. And this thinking continues quietly even in modern contexts where people judge experiences not only by what was done, but by how drained or intact they feel afterward. Because the ancient body continues to judge outcomes through the lens of lasting longer, rather than finishing. And this judging feeds directly back into behavior, encouraging moderation, thinking ahead, and taking care rather than too much and neglect. And while these traits are often framed as moral or cultural, they come from a simple biological reality. Once fur was lost, survival demanded a constant negotiation between movement and exposure. And that negotiation never truly ends because every action still makes heat. Every pause still carries risk, and every environment still has limits that must be read and respected. And as long as the human body stays exposed, it will continue to organize attention, behavior, and even satisfaction around the quiet goal of staying, working just long enough for the next adjustment to be made and the next condition to be met, and the next moment of balance to appear, while always staying aware that this balance is temporary and must be created again through timing, control, and awareness rather than assumed as a permanent state. And as this temporary balance had to be created over and over again, the human body slowly learned to measure life not by single moments, but by chains of managing where each choice influences the next and where lasting longer depended on preventing small mismatches from turning into falling apart. Because once exposure is accepted, there is no hard reset built into the body itself. And this absence of a reset forces the organism to think forward continuously, not in abstract plans, but in body forecasts of how long energy will last, how quickly heat will build up, and how soon recovery must begin. And this forecasting does not feel like conscious math but like gut feeling, because it's carried out by systems that evolve specifically to keep an exposed body inside survivable ranges. And this is why humans often describe a sense of knowing when something is not sustainable, even if they cannot say why. Because the body is putting together signals across time, guessing whether the current pattern can continue without cost. And when the answer is no, discomfort rises not to punish but to redirect behavior before damage becomes you-can't-fix it. And this redirecting shapes not only movement but decision-making more broadly. Because choices that promise immediate reward at the cost of long-term managing feel wrong in a way that's difficult to ignore since the exposed body experiences future using up as a present threat. And this feeling of threat is subtle, persistent, and building rather than dramatic, which explains why humans often struggle more with long-term strain than sudden danger. Because long-term strain erodes managing quietly, while sudden danger makes clear signals and clear responses. And in a lasting, longer-based organism, clarity matters more than intensity, since clarity allows adjustment and intensity often overwhelms it. And this liking for clarity over intensity has far-reaching results because it influences how humans organize effort, how they divide work, and how they build systems that reduce unpredictable exposure, smoothing inputs across time and space. And these systems do not come from abstract thinking alone, but from generations of bodies learning that unpredictability is costly when insulation is gone. And that stability is achieved not by removing effort, but by making effort manageable and repeatable. And as these lessons build up, they become embedded in habits, normal ways, and expectations that feel cultural but are in fact body strategies scaled up across groups. Because what works for one exposed body under heat also works better for many when coordinated. And this coordination further reduces risk by spreading out watchfulness and allowing recovery to occur without complete pulling away from activity. And this is why humans rarely work as alone units for long, because exposure makes being alone inefficient and dangerous. Since no single body can watch all things at once, and sharing seeing reduces blind spots while sharing effort preserves lasting longer. And this group managing becomes especially important over long time scales where tired feeling, injury, and using up cannot be avoided entirely but can be managed if responsibility shifts smoothly between people. And this smoothness depends on trust, not as an abstract moral value but as confidence that others will manage themselves and the group right. Because a single failure can spread quickly when bodies work close to their limits. And this is another quiet result of fur loss. Insulation once kept failure within the individual, while exposure allows it to spread, which makes coordination not optional but needed. And as these dynamics become stable, the human organism becomes less able to tolerate chaos. Not because chaos is frightening, but because it brings unpredictable interactions between effort, heat, and recovery that the body cannot quickly resolve. And this inability to tolerate shows itself as a liking for order, rhythm, and continuity that continues even when material conditions improve, because the underlying body has not changed and still sees disorder as increased exposure regardless of context. And so the exposed human body carries its evolution history into every environment, seeing conditions through the same managing lens that once decided whether it could keep moving under the sun. And while technology can reduce immediate exposure, it cannot remove the need for managing entirely, because the body still makes heat, still uses energy, and still builds up tired feeling, and therefore still needs pacing, awareness, and recovery to stay working. And this continuity ensures that the original trade-off made when fur was lost continues to shape experience quietly, without stopping and without solution, as the body moves through each moment, seeking not comfort or control, but the simple ability to continue without crossing limits that once meant the end of movement and often the end of survival. And because the body never forgets this dependence on managing, it carries a quiet tension into every situation where effort and result become disconnected. Which is why modern environments that remove visible effort while keeping constant stimulation often feel strangely unsatisfying to humans even when they are clearly safe. Because the exposed body evolved to expect a relationship between what it does and how it feels afterward. And when that relationship is blurred, the nervous system continues searching for signals that prove managing is actually happening. And this search shows as restlessness, difficulty settling, and a sense that something is incomplete. Not because danger is present, but because feedback is missing. And this absence of feedback creates a low-level being alert that never fully stops, since the body cannot confirm that its internal state matches external conditions. And historically, that proof came from direct interaction with heat, movement, resistance, and recovery, which is why activities that restore this loop, such as steady walking, controlled hard work, or exposure to natural temperature change, often make calm way bigger than their simplicity, because they re-establish the conversation the exposed body expects, allowing the nervous system to calm down because it can once more predict how effort will turn into feeling and how feeling will resolve over time. And this being able to predict is the foundation of trust. Not trust in the abstract, but trust that the body can manage what comes next without being surprised by sudden overload. And this trust reduces watchfulness, because watchfulness is only necessary when outcomes are uncertain. And this explains why humans often sleep better after physical effort, even when that effort is not extreme. Because movement under control makes heat release that follows familiar patterns, allowing the body to close the managing loop that stayed open during stillness. And this closing signals that balance has been restored temporarily and can be created again tomorrow if needed. And this expectation of recreatable balance is crucial because an exposed body cannot rely on permanent safety. It relies on repeatable processes. And these processes depend on rhythm, being steady, and gradual change rather than sudden shifts. And when life speeds up beyond what managing can follow, the body responds with strain, not because it's fragile, but because it evolved to work within a narrow band where adjustment is possible. And this band was shaped by the original conditions under which fur was lost, conditions where survival depended on staying active under heat without crossing limits that would end movement. And this dependency on limits remains embedded even when the environment changes, because biology updates slowly, and the human body continues to see stress, comfort, effort, and rest through the same lens that once decided whether it could keep moving across open ground. And this continuity explains why humans often experience not being satisfied when systems promise speed at the cost of managing. Because speed that removes adjustment leaves the body without a role. And without a role, the exposed body cannot prove safety, since safety was never something it had, but something it did repeatedly through pacing, attention, and correction. And so the human organism stays pointed toward processes rather than states, valuing the ability to manage conditions more than the removal of conditions themselves. And this pointing shapes motivation, behavior, and even seeing. Because what feels right is not the absence of challenge, but the presence of manageable challenge that allows managing to stay active. And when challenge disappears entirely, the system does not relax, it waits. Because waiting without context once meant exposure without protection. And this ancient connection continues quietly guiding likes toward environments and activities that keep the managing loop intact and readable. And as long as the human body remains exposed beneath every layer of technology, it will continue to organize experience around this quiet must to stay within limits. Not by pulling back from the world, but by engaging with it in ways that allow constant adjustment, continuity, and recovery, while never assuming that balance once achieved will remain without being actively kept up again. And as this need for active keeping up continued to shape behavior across generations, it quietly influenced how humans came to understand control itself. Because control stopped meaning dominance over conditions and started meaning interaction with it within okay bounds. And this difference matters since a body that lost fur cannot overpower conditions for long. It can only negotiate with them. And this negotiation relies on constant small adjustments rather than big acts. Which is why human skill so often appears subtle and quiet rather than dramatic. Because success is measured by the absence of collapse rather than the presence of winning. And this way of measuring success comes directly from an exposed body science where the greatest achievement is simply continuing without injury, without exhaustion, and without can't-fix-it loss of ability. And this pointing toward continuation explains why humans developed such a strong ability to notice buildup of strain. Because strain does not announce itself loudly at first. It builds up quietly across repeated days of slight mismatch between effort and recovery. And when insulation is gone, those mismatches are not erased overnight. They stay and get worse, which forces the body to treat being steady as a form of protection. And this protection is fragile because it depends on keeping rhythms that can easily be messed up by changes in schedule, environment, or demand. And so the exposed body becomes watchful not toward single threats, but toward patterns that drift slowly out of range. And this watchfulness is often misread as overthinking or worry. But at its core, it is a long-view managing response that evolved to keep the body working over long periods of effort under heat. And this long-view way of thinking also changed how humans see reward. Because rewards that encourage doing too much feel hollow or even threatening when they hurt future ability, while rewards that support recovery, stability, and continuity feel satisfying even if they appear small. Because the body judges reward not only by immediate pleasure, but by its effect on the next day, the next week, and the next season. And this judging is automatic, embedded in body science rather than taught clearly. And it explains why humans often feel regret, not after failing to push hard enough, but after pushing too hard and paying the price later. Since regret here is not moral judgment, but seeing that managing was hurt unnecessarily, and this seeing feeds back into behavior, encouraging control, thinking ahead, and pacing rather than repeated going higher. And as these feedback loops became stable, they shaped how humans organized social roles because tasks that demanded constant hard work could not be done forever by one person without breakdown. And so responsibility rotated, allowing recovery to happen while activity continued. And this rotation reduced exposure at the group level even when individual exposure stayed unavoidable. And this pattern of shared load spreading mirrors the same thinking that controls pacing within a single body scaled outward to multiple bodies, cooperating under the same environmental pressures. And this scaling is big because it shows that many social structures come not from abstract ideals, but from the real need to keep exposed bodies working across time. This need continues even when conditions change because the body still works under the same limits, making heat, using energy, and requiring recovery, and therefore still benefiting from spread effort. predictable rhythms, and clear signals. And when modern systems hide these signals by separating effort from outcome, the exposed body responds with confusion rather than relief because it cannot check that managing is occurring. And without checking, it cannot relax. And so the search for structure, routine, and meaningful effort continues, not as looking back, but as a body need carried forward from a time when losing fur meant that survival could no longer be given to the body alone, but had to be done continuously through attention, coordination, and control. And this doing remains unfinished, never resolved once and for all, because each moment presents new conditions that must be met and adjusted to again and again as the body moves forward, relying not on insulation or force but on its ability to notice, shift, respond early, and remain within the narrow spaces that allow movement to continue without interruption or collapse. And while this ability to notice and respond early kept movement going, it also changed how humans experience pressure because pressure stopped being something that arrived suddenly and became something that built up gradually through slight imbalances that were easy to ignore in the moment but costly over time. And this gradual building up trained the body to stay sensitive, even when nothing dramatic was happening, because the most dangerous states were often the quiet ones where managing drifted just enough to reduce space without making alarm. And this sensitivity to drift explains why humans often feel discomfort before they can name a clear cause, since the body is detecting a path rather than a single event and attempting to redirect it before it crosses a limit. And this attempt is not conscious plan, but body correction unfolding beneath awareness as changes in posture, pace, breathing, or attention that aim to restore balance without stopping movement entirely. And this ability for subtle correction is one of the most important outcomes of losing fur because it allows an exposed body to remain working in changing conditions without requiring full pulling away or collapse. And as this skill got better over generations, it shaped how humans relate to effort, not as something to be maximized, but as something to be adjusted. Because effort that cannot be adjusted becomes dangerous when heat cannot be trapped safely. And this adjusting requires constant comparison between internal state and external demand, which turns the world into a field of things that change rather than obstacles. And this framing influences seeing itself because terrain, weather, distance, and time are not seen as challenges to defeat but as factors to line up with, and lining up makes flow while mismatch makes strain. And this understanding comes directly from an exposed body science where success depends on keeping compatibility between the body and its surroundings rather than forcing will upon them. And this compatibility is temporary, always able to change, which prevents feeling too safe and keeps attention lightly working even during routine activity. Because routine itself can become risky if conditions shift unnoticed. And this light working differs from watchfulness in that it does not wear out the system but keeps it ready to adjust. And this readiness is what allows lasting longer too. Continue across hours and days without overwhelming tired feeling. Because the body avoids large corrections by making many small ones. And this pattern carries forward into how humans experience satisfaction. Because satisfaction is often felt when adjustments work, when the body remains within limits without struggle rather than when extremes are reached. And this satisfaction is quiet, easily overlooked, but deeply managing because it proves that the exposed body is being managed successfully. And this proof reduces the need for heightened alertness, allowing attention to soften without fully stopping. And this soft working is a mark of lasting longer-based living where the goal is not intensity but continuity. And continuity depends on preventing small stresses from building into can't-fix-it damage. And this prevention becomes more and more important as environments grow more complex because complexity brings interactions that are harder to predict and therefore harder to manage quickly. And when prediction becomes difficult, the body responds by narrowing spaces, slowing pace, and increasing reliance on familiar patterns. Not because newness is bad, but because managing requires time to recalibrate. And this recalibration is safest when changes are step by step. And this liking for step-by-step change continues even when external pressures push for speed because the exposed body puts staying working over keeping up. And this priority often creates tension between body limits and cultural demands. But the exposed body always signals when those demands go beyond what can be kept going. And these signals may be ignored temporarily, but they do not disappear because the underlying limits remain unchanged. And as long as the human body continues to make heat, use energy, and require recovery, it will continue to organize experience around the same managing rules that once allowed it to move across open landscapes without fur, relying not on protection carried within the skin, but on the continuous ability to sense, adjust, and remain just inside the limits that keep movement possible and interruption at bay. And because interruption was once the same as danger, the human body developed a deep liking for continuity that still influences how effort is organized today. Because continuity allows managing to remain active while interruption forces sudden transitions that can overwhelm an exposed system. And this liking explains why humans often feel unsettled when rhythms are repeatedly broken, even if each break seems small. Since each disruption requires the body to restart its managing process without the buffering that fur once provided. And restarting repeatedly increases uncertainty about whether balance will be restored in time. And this uncertainty keeps attention working longer than necessary, which slowly drains energy, not through effort itself, but through unresolved readiness. And this process helps explain why environments filled with constant alerts, sudden demands, and broken-up tasks feel exhausting, even without physical strain, because they repeatedly interrupt the managing flow that a lasting longer-based body relies on to stay working. And when flow is broken, the body cannot smoothly adjust heat, effort, and recovery, causing small mismatches to build up beneath awareness. And this building makes a spread-out, tired feeling that is difficult to blame on any single cause and therefore difficult to resolve quickly. And as these experiences repeat, the body learns to connect stability, not with doing nothing but with kept manageable working where inputs and outputs remain readable and predictable. And this learning is reinforced every time continuity allows recovery to occur without collapse, proving that the system is working as meant. And this proof is deeply calming because it signals that exposure is being handled well even in the absence of insulation. And this is why humans often seek environments and activities that provide steady feedback rather than intense stimulation. Because steady feedback allows the body to recalibrate continuously, while stimulation often overwhelms managing channels faster than they can respond. And this difference becomes clearer when considering how humans respond to long challenges. Because challenges that go up gradually allow adjustment, while those that spike suddenly cause strain regardless of overall difficulty. And this sensitivity to rate of change comes from an exposed body science where rapid shifts in heat or effort are more dangerous than high levels kept steadily. And as a result, the body slopes over cliffs, transitions over jumps, and sequences over shocks. And this liking shapes everything from movement to learning to emotional processing. Because sudden emotional shifts can also mess up managing by changing breathing, muscle tension, and body demand faster than the system can make up for. And so emotional moderation comes not as holding back, but as pacing, making sure that internal changes do not outrun the body's ability to respond. And this pacing becomes especially important in social contexts where the states of others influence one's own managing, because an exposed body must account not only for its own effort, but for the movement of the group, and sudden changes in group behavior can increase exposure for everyone. And this needing each other reinforces the value of being predictable, coordination, and gradual adjustment across social systems as well. And over time, these values become embedded in normal ways, routines, and expectations that put reliability over intensity and keeping up over peaks. And while these patterns are often framed as staying the same or resisting change, they are better understood as plans for keeping function when spaces are narrow and recovery is costly. And this understanding shows that much of what feels like human carefulness is actually a refined sensitivity to limits developed by a body that cannot afford to be surprised. And as long as the human body remains exposed beneath layers of culture and technology, it will continue to like conditions that allow managing to stay ahead of disruption. Because staying ahead is what once allowed movement to continue under heat and what still allows life to go without breakdown, when insulation is no longer there to soften the results of delay. And as this sensitivity to limits deepened, it quietly changed how humans relate to effort across an entire lifespan, because an exposed body cannot treat youth strength and age weakness as separate boxes. since managing must work at every stage, and so survival plans help those that kept ability, rather than those that burned it early, which explains why humans evolved unusually long developmental periods and long lifespans. Not because the body became slower, but because lasting longer as a plan benefits from learning how to manage limits before pushing against them. And this learning requires time, repeated exposure, and gradual fine-tuning, which allows the body to build an internal map of what it can keep going under different conditions. And this map becomes more detailed with experience, not less. Because each time with heat, tired feeling, or using up makes prediction better and improves future managing. And this getting better does not end in adulthood, but continues as conditions change and abilities shift, requiring constant updating rather than reliance on fixed rules. And this changing adaptation is only necessary because insulation no longer absorbs error, and because error has lasting results once exposure is accepted. So humans watch their bodies far longer than most animals, noticing signs of strain long after peak physical strength has passed because the body stays the main site of managing and cannot be given away entirely to systems or tools. And this ongoing watchfulness changes identity itself, because identity becomes tied not to maximum output, but to the ability to remain capable over time and to adjust expectations without collapsing, which creates a subtle connection between youth and age, where experience makes up for declining raw power by improving managing. And this trade would not make sense in an insulated organism where protection stays constant regardless of awareness. But in an exposed body, awareness becomes a resource that grows rather than fades. And this growth explains why humans often value experience in roles that require long judgment rather than explosive action. Because lasting, longer-based living rewards those who can see drift ahead, recognize early warning signs, and adjust course before damage builds up. And this pattern scales beyond the individual into societies where things that keep continuity across generations come not as abstract ideals but as ways for keeping group managing over long spans of time. And these things work best when they change gradually, allowing recalibration rather than sudden shifts that overwhelm ability. While such going slow is often criticized as resistance, it reflects the same body thinking that controls an exposed body moving through changing environments. Because sudden change increases uncertainty, and uncertainty increases exposure, and exposure increases risk. And this chain stays active regardless of technology advancement, because the body itself has not changed and still responds to unpredictability with heightened watchfulness and strain. And this is why periods of rapid disruption often make widespread exhaustion even when material conditions improve, because the rate of change goes beyond the managing ability of bodies, adapted for lasting longer rather than shock. And this mismatch makes tired feeling that cannot be fixed by rest alone, because rest fixes using up, not confusion. And when knowing where you are is lost, the body stays alert even while inactive, waiting for conditions to become stable enough to resume good managing. And this waiting can become long in environments where change is constant, leading to a continuing sense of unease that is not tied to any single threat, but to the absence of stable reference points. And this absence is felt more strongly by an exposed body because it lacks internal buffering and therefore depends on external regularities to guide adjustment. And when those regularities break apart, the body makes up by narrowing spaces, slowing responses, and holding to familiar patterns not out of looking back, but out of need. And this need continues to shape behavior, seeing, and liking, quietly guiding humans toward ways of living that allow managing to remain readable and continuous even as circumstances change. And as long as the human organism remains built around heat release, lasting longer, and exposure, it will continue to organize life around this quiet must to stay oriented, stay responsive, and stay capable of moving forward without interruption. By managing change at a pace the body can follow and adjust to while never assuming that stability once achieved will continue without ongoing attention and recalibration. And as this need for ongoing recalibration continued, it subtly influenced how humans understand meaning itself, because meaning became linked not to alone achievements but to patterns that could be kept going without wearing down ability. And this framing explains why activities that line up effort with recovery often feel meaningful even when they lack obvious rewards. while activities that promise rapid gain but leave the body used up feel empty afterward since the exposed body judges meaning through its effect on future managing rather than immediate outcome. And this judging works below conscious thinking, shaping liking, motivation, and satisfaction without needing explanation. And this is why humans often feel drawn to practices that appear repetitive or simple because repetition under stable conditions allows the body to prove that managing is working. And proof is deeply reassuring to an organism that cannot rely on insulation to absorb error. And this reassurance quiets watchfulness not by removing uncertainty, but by showing that uncertainty can be managed repeatedly. And this showing builds trust in process rather than in outcome, which is a crucial difference because outcomes are always temporary while processes can be redone. And this redoing is what allows an exposed body to continue without fear of collapse. And as this trust in process grows, it reduces the need for extremes because extremes compress effort into short windows that increase heat building and strain while spreading over time, keeps things within calculable ranges, and this spreading becomes a central organizing rule not only for movement but for thought, attention, and emotion because all of these make body demand that must be managed. And when demand spikes suddenly, managing lags, creating discomfort that the body connects with risk. And this connection discourages sudden shifts in favor of gradual transitions even in non-physical areas. And this continuity across areas shows how deeply the loss of fur changed the human organism. Since a change that began as a heat adaptation cascaded into a general plan for interacting with the world based on pacing, steps, and adjustment. And this plan continues even when the original environmental pressures are no longer obvious because the body still works according to the same limits, making heat requiring recovery and responding to imbalance before it becomes damage. And this continuation explains why humans often experience relief when systems restore clear feedback loops, even if those systems demand effort, because effort with feedback is easier to manage than ease without signals. And this liking becomes more and more important as environments grow more abstract and in between, because abstraction removes sensory clues that once guided adjustment, forcing the body to rely on indirect information that may arrive too late, or too weakly to be useful. And without that, the body cannot relax, and clarity is what the exposed body needs. Not because danger is greater, but because clarity is reduced. And reduced clarity increases watchfulness, which drains energy quietly, over time adding to tired feeling that feels too big compared to activity and difficult to fix through rest alone. Since rest does not restore knowing where you are, and knowing where you are is what allows managing to start again well. And this difference underscores why the exposed body values making sense above comfort. Because making sense allows prediction, and prediction allows adjustment, while comfort without making sense leaves the system uncertain and waiting. And this waiting is costly for an organism that evolved to keep moving under heat by staying just ahead of collapse. And as long as that organism remains the foundation of human experience, it will continue to seek conditions that make managing visible, manageable, and repeatable even as culture, technology, and environment continue to change. And this continuity ensures that the original trade made when fur was lost continues to echo through seeing, behavior, and liking, shaping how humans live, move, work, and rest. Not by telling specific actions, but by pushing the system toward ways of being that keep the ability to continue, without interruption through attention pacing and constant gentle recalibration, rather than forced insulation or final solutions. And this practice of survival as something done repeatedly also changed how humans relate to hope. Hope is often imagined as belief in a good outcome. But for an exposed body, hope is quieter and more practical. It is the sense that adjustment remains possible. When hope exists, the body continues to work because it believes that effort can still be brought back into balance. When hope disappears, what vanishes is not being positive, but the expectation that recovery or correction will be allowed. In those moments, pulling away is not sadness. It is saving what you have. This difference explains why humans can handle difficult conditions for long periods when they can see a path for recalibration, even if that path is narrow. Harsh environments, demanding work, or long uncertainty are tolerated when they unfold in ways that allow pacing and recovery. By contrast, relatively easy conditions become unbearable when they are rigid, unclear, or inescapable because the body senses that adjustment has been removed. Once adjustment is blocked, lasting longer loses its foundation. This sensitivity also shapes how humans experience fairness. Fairness is not only about equal outcome but about equal strain. When strain is spread in a way that allows everyone to remain working, systems feel fair even if they are demanding. When strain is concentrated, hidden, or denied, unfairness is felt in the body before it is put into words. The exposed body recognizes when spaces are being worn down unevenly because collapse in one place threatens continuity everywhere. Over time, this in-the-body recognition influenced how humans built normal ways and expectations around care. Care is not simply feeling bad for someone. It is the keeping up of managing capacity in others. To care for someone is to notice when their spaces are narrowing and to step in before collapse occurs. This stepping in might take the form of rest, support, or respreading of effort. These practices are often framed morally, but their origin lies in the practical need of keeping exposed bodies viable within shared systems. This is also why humans often experience guilt when they ignore their own limits or the limits of others. Guilt arises not only from breaking rules, but from sensing that managing has been hurt. It is a signal that continuity has been threatened without need. In this way, emotional responses become extensions of body forecasting, guiding behavior back toward conditions that keep capacity. As environments became more and more in between, the challenge shifted from managing physical heat to managing information and emotional load, yet the same rules apply. Cognitive overload works like heat overload. Emotional too much mirrors losing water. Without clear intervals for recovery, strain builds up invisibly. The exposed body responds with the same plans it always has: narrowing focus, slowing working, and seeking readable patterns that restore being able to predict. This continuity shows why modern tired feeling often feels confusing. People may not be physically exhausted, yet they feel unable to continue. The body is responding not to muscle using up, but to managing overload. Too many things change too quickly. Too little feedback proves adjustment. The ancient systems that once managed movement under heat now struggle to manage abstraction without rhythm. When rhythm is restored, even briefly, energy returns. All of this points to a central truth that remains easy to miss. Human strength does not lie in resistance to limits, but in responsiveness to them. The loss of fur forced this responsiveness to become exact, constant, and unavoidable. It demanded attention not as a good thing, but as a requirement. Attention keeps the body inside survivable ranges. That requirement did not end when climates changed or technologies got better. It continues in every area where effort meets result. Whenever humans feel relief after slowing down, clarity after organizing effort, or motivation after restoring rhythm, they are experiencing the same managing success that once allowed their ancestors to keep moving across open landscapes under the sun. The story then is not one of loss followed by making up for it, but of change. Fur was exchanged for a way of living that depends on awareness rather than protection. The body became exposed, and in doing so it became exact. That exactness still controls human life, quietly shaping how people work, rest, relate, and hope, always pointing them toward the same lasting goal: to remain capable of the next adjustment, the next response, the next continuation, even when the future cannot be made safe, only manageable. To keep this exactness intact, it helps to see how all these threads come together on a single limit rather than branching endlessly. The limit is simple. Once insulation disappeared, the body could no longer tolerate unmanaged building up. Heat, tired feeling, strain, and error all had to be handled as they arose. Nothing could be stored forever without result. This limit compresses complexity instead of expanding it. It forces every system, biological or social, to answer the same question repeatedly. Can this be kept going without closing off future adjustment? From that question follows a specific thinking of action. Actions are liked when they keep options open. Keeping options open is not being indecisive. It is the ability to change course without collapse. An exposed body survives by keeping options open because closed paths increase exposure. Once an option is closed, recovery becomes harder, timing becomes tighter, and spaces shrink. This is why humans naturally resist can't-go-back commitments that demand constant output. The resistance is not fear of responsibility. It is sensitivity to the loss of adjustability. This sensitivity explains why humans often value having extra, even when it appears inefficient. Having extra creates slack. Slack creates time. Time allows correction. For once provided slack by buffering temperature and injury. After its loss, slack had to be created through behavior. Extra supplies, different routes, backup plans, shared roles, these are not signs of weakness. They are structural replacements for insulation. They slow failure. They turn sudden collapse into gradual strain that can be addressed. The same thinking applies to why humans dislike systems that appear pushed to the edge. Edge pushing leaves. No room for error. In insulated organisms, this might be okay. In exposed ones, it is dangerous. When everything is pushed to maximum efficiency, there is no space to let out heat, absorb mistakes, or recover from going off track. Tension rises not because the system is demanding, but because it is breakable. This breakableness is the opposite of lasting longer. Lasting longer depends on bouncing back, and bouncing back depends on recoverability. Recoverability depends on space. Space is therefore not extra. It is necessary. This is why humans often rebuild systems after failure by bringing back buffers rather than doubling down on speed. The lesson is learned repeatedly because it is forced repeatedly by biology. Importantly, this does not mean humans avoid challenge. It means they select challenges that allow feedback and adaptation. Challenges with clear slopes can be climbed. Challenges that present walls cannot. The exposed body prefers slopes, not because slopes are easy, but because they allow adjustment. May climb. This liking explains why gradual difficulty increases are more effective than sudden intensity. Why training works better when load is step by step, and why learning sticks when complexity is layered rather than dumped. This thinking also limits how far abstraction can go before it breaks alignment. Abstraction removes sensory feedback. Without feedback, managing weakens. When managing weakens, watchfulness increases. When watchfulness continues, tired feeling builds up. The system then makes up by seeking concrete anchors, routines, rituals, physical movement, or clear structure. These anchors are not looking back. Retreats. They are managing resets. They reconnect action to result in a way the body can read. Seen this way, many modern struggles are not about motivation or discipline, but about mismatch between demand and managing capacity. When people slow down, simplify, or pull away, they are not failing to adapt. They are adapting in the only way an exposed organism can, by trying to reopen space for adjustment when spaces disappear. All of this keeps the story tightly tied to its beginning. Humans lost fur to manage heat during kept activity. That loss removed passive protection. In response, survival reorganized around timing, pacing, space, and recovery. These rules did not stay stuck to body science. They scaled upward into behavior, cooperation, systems, and values. They continue to work now, quietly forcing the same limit. Nothing that builds up without managing can be kept going as long as the human body remains structured around heat release rather than insulation. This limit does not loosen. It does not care about intention, belief system, or technology. It simply asks again and again whether the next step leaves room to adjust. When the answer is yes, movement continues. When the answer is no, the body signals the need to change course. That signal is not noise, it is the core mechanism that replaced fur. And it still controls what can last and what cannot. This insistence on leaving room to adjust also explains why humans react so strongly to environments that deny reversibility. Can't go back systems collapse options into a single path. And a single path under exposure is always dangerous. Once committed, the body senses that any wrong calculation will get worse rather than go away. Stress rises not because the task is hard, but because exit routes are blocked. An exposed organism survives by keeping exits visible, not by avoiding effort. This is why people often feel calmer working harder when they know they can stop, pause, or change, and more anxious doing less when they cannot. The presence of an exit keeps managing going. Its absence speeds up strain. This liking reshapes how humans understand risk-taking. Risk is acceptable when losses are limited and learning is possible. Risk becomes unbearable when losses cascade. Limited risk allows the body to test limits without threatening continuity. Cascading risk threatens collapse. The difference is body-based before it is thinking-based. It explains why humans willingly take on difficult challenges with clear feedback while avoiding seemingly small commitments that can spiral out of control. The body recognizes which risks keep space and which erase it. Space also explains why humans evolve such sensitivity to early signs. Subtle clues, slight tired feeling, reduced clarity, irritability are treated seriously because they forecast narrowing options. These clues are often dismissed culturally as weakness or negativity, yet body-wise they are exact instruments. They arrive early because early action is cheaper. Fur once delayed result. Now the body must not. Early signals are how the organism buys time. Ignoring them converts manageable strain into can't-fix-it cost. Over long periods, this early warning pointing shapes how humans plan. Planning is not an attempt to control outcomes. It is an attempt to protect adjustability. Plans that include backup options reduce exposure. Plans that assume perfect doing increase it. This is why humans tend to distrust rigid plans even when they look elegant. Prettiness without flexibility is breakable. The body responds to breakableness with tension because it knows that correction will be expensive or impossible once going off track occurs. This thinking also limits how much making perfect humans can tolerate. Making perfect that removes slack improves short-term output, but hurts long-term viability. The exposed body senses this trait immediately. When systems are made perfect to the edge, any going off becomes catastrophic. Stress rises because the cost of error is no longer absorbable. Humans therefore repeatedly rebuild slack after failures even when doing so appears inefficient. Slack is not waste. It is the medium through which recovery works. Recovery itself deserves exactness here. Recovery is not simply rest, and it is not always doing nothing. Recovery is the restoring of space. Sometimes space is restored by sleep, sometimes by movement that lets out built-up load, sometimes by making simpler that reduces things to track. The body knows which form is required by reading what has been used up. When recovery restores space, confidence returns. When it does not, rest feels hollow and effort remains something to avoid. This space-based understanding also explains why humans struggle in environments that constantly promise making perfect without admitting recovery. When demands go up while recovery is put off forever, the body predicts a future where space approaches zero. Motivation collapses because the forecast is negative. This collapse is not a moral failure. It is accurate risk-checking by an organism that cannot survive without adjustability. All of these responses keep circling back to the same beginning without drifting. Humans lost fur to manage heat during kept activity. That choice removed passive buffering. To make up for it, survival reorganized around keeping space through timing, pacing, having extra, and early correction. These rules are not optional likes layered onto culture. They are forced by the body every time it judges whether an action can be repeated without damage because repetition is the true test of viability. Anything that can be done once but not again is a problem for a lasting longer-based organism. Anything that can be done again and again with small adjustments becomes reliable. Reliability, not intensity, is what allowed humans to continue. That continuing required systems that slow failure, show feedback early, and keep exits open. As this thinking continues to scale upward, it shapes how humans judge big organizations, relationships, and lifestyles. Those that erase it feel pushing down regardless of intent. This judging happens quietly, often before reasons are put into words because it is grounded in body forecasting rather than belief system. The body asks the same question it has always asked since fur was lost. Will this leave room to adjust? Or will it close the path ahead and force collapse if anything goes wrong? This question about whether a path remains open continues to control how humans judge commitment at every scale. Commitment that keeps adjustability feels stabilizing, while commitment that locks the future into a single narrow channel feels threatening. The difference is subtle, but deciding. An exposed body can tolerate kept effort if it knows that recalibration remains possible. It cannot tolerate effort that demands blind continuation regardless of changing conditions. This is why humans often negotiate terms, timelines, and edges before fully working. They are not resisting responsibility. They are making sure that managing can continue once working begins. This thinking also explains why humans respond poorly to environments that treat breakdown as acceptable side damage. When failure is made normal without ways for recovery, the body sees participation as unsafe. Stress rises not because people fear failing, but because they fear being unable to recover afterward. Recovery is the currency of lasting longer. Without it, effort becomes taking out. The exposed body pulls away from taking out naturally. Over time, this sensitivity shaped how humans experience trust. Trust is built not by promises of protection, but by shown recoverability. Systems that show they can absorb error without collapse earn trust. Systems that punish error harshly or unpredictably wear it down. This response is not belief-based. It is body-based. An exposed organism cannot afford to stay inside systems that turn small mistakes into can't-fix-it losses. It must seek contexts where correction is possible. This is why see-throughness matters so deeply to humans even when outcomes are bad. See-throughness keeps legibility. Legibility keeps managing. When processes are visible, the body can see ahead, strain, and prepare. Recovery. When processes are hidden, watchfulness spikes because forecasting becomes impossible. The exposed body responds to not being able to see as it would to sudden environmental shifts by tightening spaces and saving energy. Working falls not because people do not care, but because they cannot safely put in. The same rule controls how humans experience having choice. Having choice is not the absence of limit. It is the presence of choice under limit. An exposed body does not seek limitless freedom. It seeks the ability to adjust when signals demand it. Having choice that allows adjustment supports working. Having choice that exists only in name while locking outcomes hurts it. The body recognizes the difference immediately. As these body likes build up, they quietly shape culture. Cultures that emphasize pacing, shared load, and recoverability tend to continue. Cultures that praise constant going higher and can't go back commitment tend to burn through ability. This is not because one set of values is morally better, but because one lines up with the limits of an exposed organism and the other ignores them. Over time, lining up wins by wearing down. Importantly, none of this removes ambition or new ideas. It channels them. New ideas that increase adjustability spread. New ideas that increase breakableness fail. Tools that reduce uncertainty and expand space last. Tools that compress feedback and speed up result create short-lived gains followed by long-term strain. This pattern repeats across history because it is forced by bodies, not by ideas. Even pleasure follows this rule. Pleasure that fits into keepable patterns makes life better. Pleasure that messes up managing wears it down. The body tells the difference not by moral judgment, but by how each affects future ability. This is why some pleasures leave people refreshed and others leave them used up. The difference lies in whether space was kept. All of this keeps the story tied down. Humans lost fur to manage heat during kept movement. That loss removed passive protection and made survival conditional on active managing. Managing required time, space, feedback, and adjustability. Those requirements scaled outward into behavior, cooperation, and systems. They remain working now, even when the original environmental pressures are no longer obvious. The result is a species that does not do well by pushing blindly forward, but by keeping the ability to correct course. Strength shows itself as continuity. Intelligence shows itself as seeing ahead. Care shows itself as keeping of space. These showings can look slow or careful from the outside, but they are the only forms that work with an exposed body that must keep moving without collapsing. So the question the body asks has never changed. It is not whether something can be achieved, but whether it can be achieved. Again, without breaking what makes achievement possible. When the answer is yes, working deepens. When the answer is no, resistance appears. It is the legacy of a decision made long ago when humans traded fur for lasting longer and accepted a life where survival depends on keeping paths open. Space is intact, and the future adjustable enough to take the next step, without crossing a point of no return. This legacy also explains why humans rarely feel satisfied by systems that promise final solutions. Finalness removes the need for adjustment and for an exposed body that absence feels unnatural rather than comforting. Once fur was gone, life no longer resolved into safe end states. It became a sequence of temporary balances, each one kept only as long as conditions allowed. The body learned that stability is temporary and that assuming permanentness invites error. As a result, humans tend to trust processes more than conclusions. They are reassured not by guarantees but by the presence of ways to respond that can work when guarantees fail. This liking subtly changes how humans experience confidence. Confidence is not the belief that nothing will go wrong. It is the belief that something can be done when it does. The exposed body values this form of confidence because it keeps motion. Confidence based on certainty collapses when certainty breaks. This difference explains why people often feel calmer in difficult situations they know how to handle than in easy situations they do not understand. Understanding restores the ability to respond. Over time, this pointing reshaped how humans approach complexity. Complexity that shows its structure can be managed. Complexity that hides its structure cannot. The body reacts differently to each. Visible structure allows prediction. Prediction allows pacing. Pacing keeps space. Hidden structure forces guessing. Guessing speeds exposure. This is why humans are drawn to maps, models, and explanations. Even when those explanations do not change outcomes, they change readability. And readability restores managing. The same applies to uncertainty about the self. Humans often seek stories that explain who they are and what they are doing, not merely for identity, but for managing. A making sense story links effort to result across time. It allows the body to see ahead its own future and give energy accordingly. When stories break apart, managing weakens. The body feels lost not because it lacks meaning, but because it lacks knowing where it is. Knowing where you are is the must-have for lasting longer. This need for knowing where you are also shapes how humans relate to change. Change that keeps reference points is okay. Change that removes them is destabilizing. The exposed body does not resist change itself. It resists losing where you are. When reference points disappear, adjustment becomes guessing. Guessing increases risk. This is why transitions are easier when they include continuity, familiar rhythms, kept skills, recognizable roles. These elements anchor managing while new patterns form. As environments speed up, this anchoring becomes more important rather than less. Speed compresses feedback. Compression reduces correction time. Reduced correction time increases the cost of error. The body responds by slowing internally, even if externally it is pushed to go faster. This internal slowing shows as hesitation, tired feeling, or pulling away. These reactions are often framed as resistance to progress, but they are protective responses to compressed adjustability. This way of seeing reframes many modern tensions. When people push back against relentless making perfect, they are not rejecting improvement. They are rejecting breakableness. When they seek balance, they are not avoiding effort. They are keeping the ability to continue. When they pull away from systems that promise growth without recovery, they are not uncaring. They are responding accurately to forecasts of collapse. Throughout all of this, the original limit remains intact. Without fur, the body cannot afford unmanaged building up. Heat, tired feeling, stress, and error must be let out or respread. If they are not, the system fails. This limit applies whether the building up is physical, thinking-based, emotional, or social. That is why the same patterns reappear across areas. Pacing in movement becomes pacing in work. Recovery after hard work becomes recovery after stress. Shared load in travel becomes shared responsibility in groups. Space and body science becomes slack in systems. None of these are word pictures. They are direct translations of a survival plan that began with the loss of insulation and expanded outward. The human body still forces this plan quietly. It rewards environments that allow adjustment with energy and working. It punishes environments that deny it with tired feeling and pulling away. These responses are not conscious decisions. They are the output of managing systems that evolved to keep an exposed organism alive under conditions where failure to adjust meant collapse. And because those systems remain unchanged at their core, They continue to shape what feels livable and what does not. Anything that keeps adjustability feels okay. Anything that removes it feels pushing down. This feeling arrives before explanation, before belief system, before language. It is the body answering the same question it has answered. Since fur was lost, does this path leave room to adjust, or does it narrow until movement becomes impossible if anything goes wrong? This narrowing toward the end of the argument does not mean resolving it, but exposing its full reach. What began as a heat problem never stayed just heat. Once insulation was gone, every area of life became subject to the same rule building up. Without release leads to failure. That rule is simple, but its results are vast. It controls how bodies move, how groups organize, how systems last, and how individuals judge what feels possible or impossible long before they can explain why. At this stage, it becomes clear that many tensions humans experience are not contradictions, but mismatches between body limit and external design. Systems often promise limitless growth, constant speed up, or permanent solutions. Yet the body continues to work within limits that cannot be negotiated away. When those promises collide with reality, strain appears. It is clarity arriving in body form. The exposed organism is signaling that the proposed pattern cannot be repeated without damage. This is why humans repeatedly rebuild what they have already learned. They push toward extremes, experience collapse, then bring back space. They speed up, burn out, then slow down. They put pressure in one place, watch failure spread, then respread load. This cycle is not cultural forgetting. It is the forcing of a limit that does not weaken with time. The body does not remember ideas, it remembers results. Each collapse reinforces the same lesson. Lasting longer requires adjustability. The continuing of this lesson explains why even highly advanced environments still rely on basic managing practices. Sleep remains can't be negotiated. Movement remains restoring. Social support remains protective. These are not leftovers of a primitive past. They are active requirements for an exposed organism managing building up across time. No amount of abstraction removes the need to let out heat, resolve strain, or restore space. What often changes is how these needs are hidden. Physical exhaustion becomes mental tired feeling. Environmental heat becomes thinking overload. Losing water becomes emotional using up. Yet the body responds the same way. When building up outpaces release, managing fails. When managing fails, working declines. When working declines, systems see the signal incorrectly and often respond by increasing pressure, which speeds failure, rather than correcting it. Understanding this movement reframes many human struggles. Burnout is not lack of bouncing back. It is evidence of kept misalignment. Pulling away is not caring, it is withdrawal to keep what remains. Resistance is not without reason. It is early detection of narrowing spaces. These responses are not signs that something is wrong with people. They are signs that something is wrong with the pattern people are being asked to keep going. At the individual level, this recognition can be disorienting because it challenges stories of unlimited potential. Humans are capable of extraordinary lasting longer, but only under conditions that allow managing to work. Potential is conditional. It expands when space exists and contracts when it does not. The exposed body knows this even when belief system denies it. That knowledge surfaces as gut feeling, discomfort, or sudden loss of motivation when edges are crossed. At the group level, the same rule decides which systems continue. Systems that include recovery survive. Systems that deny it collapse or must be rebuilt. This is true regardless of scale or intent. No amount of moral framing or technology smartness can override the need for space. The exposed body forces this rule without stopping because the cost of ignoring it was once death and remains breakdown. Seen from this angle, the loss of fur was not a lone evolution event. It was a commitment to a life controlled by feedback. Without insulation, the body became see-through to result. Nothing could be hidden for long. Errors surfaced quickly. Recovery had to be planned. Working together became necessary. Attention became survival. This see-throughness increased vulnerability, but it also increased exactness. Humans became exacting because they had to be. That exactness still works quietly beneath modern life. It is why people feel relief when complexity makes simple. Why they sleep better after effort than after standing still. Why they trust systems that allow correction and distrust those that demand perfection. Why they sense when a path is not keepable, even if they cannot say the reason. These feelings are not mystical. They are managing outputs from a body designed to manage building up without insulation. As the argument approaches its final stretch, the shape of the answer becomes unavoidable. Humans lost their fur not to become weaker, but to remain active. Under heat. That adaptation removed passive protection and forced survival to depend on active managing. Managing required pacing, space, early warning, and recovery. Those requirements did not fade. They expanded outward, shaping behavior, cooperation, and systems across time. The result is a species that cannot do well through control alone. It must negotiate with limits. It must listen to feedback. It must keep the ability to adjust. This does not make humans fragile. It makes them conditional. Their strength exists only as long as the conditions that support managing are kept up. When those conditions disappear, strength becomes pointless. What remains then is not a neat conclusion but a recognition. The human body is still exposed. It still builds up. It still requires release. Every structure that ignores this will eventually fail. And every structure that respects it will feel in some quiet way livable. This feeling is not just liking. It is alignment, and alignment is the true legacy of losing fur. It is the reason humans continue to seek balance rather than certainty, process rather than finalness, and continuation rather than conquest. The body does not ask whether something is impressive. It asks whether it can be lived with again tomorrow. When the answer is yes, life moves forward. When the answer is no, something must change because once insulation was gone, there was no longer any room for pretending otherwise. The ending does not arrive as a big reveal because nothing here was hidden. It arrives as recognition. The human body has been telling this story continuously long before language existed. When fur was lost, survival stopped being something that happened automatically. It became something that had to be managed moment by moment through attention, timing, and control. That requirement never ended. It only changed form. What looks like restlessness, burnout, resistance, or not being satisfied in modern life is often the same signal expressed in new conditions. It is the body responding to patterns that cannot be repeated without damage. It is the exposed organism, announcing that building up has gone beyond release, that spaces have narrowed too far, that adjustment has been delayed too long. These signals are not failures of will. They are expressions of the same managing intelligence that once prevented collapse under heat. The mistake humans repeatedly make is to treat these signals as obstacles to overcome rather than information to read. Overcoming them works briefly. Ignoring them works until it doesn't. The body is patient, but it is exact. It will always force. The same rule, what cannot be managed, cannot be kept going. This rule applies regardless of time period, culture, or technology. It applies to work, relationships, systems, and identities just as it once applied to movement across open land. Understanding this does not lead to retreat or weakness. It leads to clarity. Clarity about why certain paths feel right, even when they are demanding, and why others feel wrong, even when they promise ease. Clarity about why pacing restores energy while speed up drains it. Clarity about why shared load strengthens groups, while pressure breaks them. None of this is accidental. It is the direct result of living without insulation. The human body never adapted to remove limits. It adapted to read them early enough to respond. That responsiveness is not carefulness for its own sake. It is what makes lasting longer possible. Lasting longer is not stubborn continuing. It is the ability to continue without destroying the conditions that allow continuation. Once fur was gone, lasting longer became the only viable form of strength. This is why humans do not truly seek comfort, even when they claim to. They seek manageability. They seek conditions where effort leads to recovery, where feedback arrives in time, where error can be corrected, and where the future remains open. Comfort without these qualities feels hollow. Difficulty with them feels meaningful. The body knows the difference because its survival once depended on recognizing it correctly. Nothing in modern life cancels this inheritance. Temperature control does not remove the need for recovery. Automation does not remove the need for pacing. Abstraction does not remove the need for readability. The form of building up changes, but building up itself does not disappear. Heat becomes thinking load. Distance becomes duration. Losing water becomes emotional using up. The managing thinking remains the same. So the final answer is not a sentence but a lens. Humans lost their fur to stay active under heat. That loss removed passive protection and made survival conditional on active managing. Everything that followed, attention, pacing, cooperation, systems, values, exists to support that condition. When life lines up with it, humans feel capable, working, and alive. When life breaks it, they feel drained, resistant, and lost. The body is not asking for perfection. It is asking for adjustability. It is not asking for certainty. It is asking for time. It is asking that effort leaves something intact for what comes next. These requests are not negotiable because they are written into the structure of an exposed organism that chose lasting longer over insulation. And that choice still controls what can last. When a path keeps space and allows correction, the body moves forward. When a path demands everything now and offers nothing later, the body will eventually refuse, no matter how convincing the story sounds. This refusal is not failure. It is loyalty to a deeper thinking. The loss of fur did not make humans vulnerable by accident. It made them exact on purpose. And exactness,